Angelo, still speaking about the step-aside resolution, I mean, we've unpacked it extensively over this weekend. The president saying that the overall view is for the retention of the step-aside resolution, but there are concerns about the application and the implementation of this resolution. But to my surprise, not a lot of delegates actually clapped to that.
Well, yes, I think partly what the president has as president of the ANC is the prerogative to sum up in his closing remarks the tone he wishes to set. And so in that selection, in suggesting that the step-aside rule is not going to be pushed aside, that now is officially the policy that has to be discussed in the branches. And so this, I think, is an important element of how power works in a political party like the ANC. Whatever is going on at the bottom up, there's also the top down. And here you have the vanguardist presidential position suggesting that a certain rule, regardless of whether it goes down well with everybody, the delegates in their name, the president summarizes, have decided the step-aside rule must remain.
Let's also talk about what the president mentioned there, the overhaul of local government.
Absolutely. So for most people, part of the problem of the state capture project and the experience of corruption and maladministration has been that they actually are the receiving end of the corruption at that local government level. They don't know, for example, where their services are going to come from. Their children sit in schools that are not policed by local community policing issues. They sit with local services that are not delivered, whether it's water or power. And so when it comes to overhauling local government, some of that will have to involve dealing with the cadre deployment problem, which the president defends as president of the ANC and which various of the other members of the NEC have defended. And these documents and this conference has indicated that they will now try and deploy the right kind of cadre into local government and other forms in order to overhaul. But the question remains, do such exist, and do they have the support of the larger networks on which the ANC has been relying for the last 20 years?
What else stood out for you?
What stood out for me specifically was this push for a kind of corruption will not be tolerated, which seems to be a statement coming from Mr. Ramaphosa in his administration of the ANC since 2017, that December. And the question remains for me, what kind of, shall we say, force is going to be put behind such a statement, its commitment, because it's now been 5 years since a new dawn was supposedly declared, and people inside Mr. Ramaphosa's inner circle have been implicated in issues of maladministration, corruption, malfeasance, not least during the pandemic and its consequences for South Africa. And the question is, what are the consequences for those? And so when he says that the step-aside rule should be applied fairly and impartially, the question is, will the same impartiality and fairness also apply to other forms of corruption prosecution? And that will become a crucial question that the NPA will have to answer. Does it favor people who are seen to be close to Mr. Ramaphosa, or does it have absolutely no favorites in prosecuting anybody and everybody implicated in, complicit with, and somehow involved in corruption? Because that's possibly one of the key problems that we face in a society that has been undone even for the gains made since 1994, and that ordinary South Africans, I think, have no longer an appetite for, and whose lives have been blighted because of the, shall we say, corruption of local government through the corruption of the party.
And of course, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa also needs to present himself this coming week before the Integrity Committee.
Absolutely, and so he'll have to answer questions himself about how he conducted himself and what he took responsibility for in relation to the office of the presidency, handling the Phala issue as they have. And then beyond that, there will be the questions he has to answer in relation to the State Capture Commission, where, Deputy Chief Justice then and now Chief Justice Zondo questioned what Mr. Ramaphosa knew and what he did about what he knew when he was deputy president of the party and the country. And so these are, I think, important questions that will have to be answered, not just to the satisfaction of members of the party, but also to the greater public in South Africa. Because if Mr. Ramaphosa's job and mission is to overhaul the ANC and renew it and give it life, I mean, this endless return to the ANC lives, the ANC leads, those are nice slogans to have. The question is, can there be life beyond 2024 for a party that is as embroiled in its internal internal conflagrations, as well as the challenges of a society that it now needs to manage towards some kind of healing. And that, I think, is a hard ask. But Mr. Ramaphosa says he's up to the task. The party says they're up to the task. The question will remain whether voters in 2024 think that what happens between December 2022 and that election is convincing them.
Thank you so much. Well, those are both our analysts there, Professor Susan Boyce and, of course, Angelo Fick, just unpacking the president's closing address here as he closed the 6th National Policy Conference of the ANC. Now, the big task is for these sub-committees to actually finalize their reports at the end of August. And, of course, these policies will then go back to the branches, but will only be adopted in December at the elective conference. So it is still a long way ahead for the ANC. But actually, just to wrap this entire show up for us, we'll just cross over to our political editor, Mzwandile Mbeche, econ editor, Tsepo Mongwai, and of course, our foreign news editor, Mesof Mokwena.
Well, thank you very much, Natasha. Indeed, we've had those incisive insight into what possibly could happen going forward. But as you've indicated, I'm with my colleagues here. I did indicate that our economics editor and our international editor is here. I will start off with you, Sophie. What is your takeaway from what this conference, not necessarily the speech, because the speech was very short. I think it was just meant to say, we've done well, it's a goodbye. But there were a lot more issues other than the speech. What's your takeaway?
Well, I think to start with, when you compare to previous policy conferences, this policy conference was kind of very subdued. And it spoke to the challenges the ANC is facing currently, including the leader of the party, President Cyril Ramaphosa, with the Parliament, and therefore it was a divided house. The vibrant mood that we are used to when we are covering the ANC conference was not there. Even in songs, yes, they did sing when the conference started, but it wasn't that lively mood we are used to, but also the mood where the songs speaks to what delegates are up to. Even now, today, you can hear the president of the ANC was quite short, touching here and there in terms of issues that they discussed and what needs to be done, but generally not your normal, vibrant, following the speech with clapping of hands all the time when the president of the ANC speaks. And lastly, on content, clearly delegates came here to defend the previous policies that were adopted here in Nasrec in 2017, and they definitely did that.
What do you think, what do you attribute that mutedness to, given that you have said we're used to robust engagements?
Well, I think it speaks to the divisions. I mean, the ANC is a divided house. There's no, that unity that we are used to. And therefore, what are the issues. You have people who are aggrieved in terms of how this NEC and the officials of the ANC have handled certain issues within the party. And therefore, it is very difficult to ensure that you have a very lively audience, or you have a very excited group of people who are here to really deliberate. And I think what they came here for was to ensure that they defend the policies adopted in 2017, but also raise issues during the commissions, issues that they are not happy with.
Well, Tsepo, let me bring you in. As much as politically there seemed to be a bit of a lull, but key issues they had come here for, the policy issues, were in the main economy. And you know that the Commission on Economy is normally the fullest. So what does that tell you? So did they go to the crunch of what should be done to change the structure of the economy?
I think if you look at the level of engagement that took place here, and you look at the delegates who are here, so the engagement is on a much higher level. So the way they treat issues, there's a better understanding among the delegates. If you've observed, some of the delegates who are here, and then the real test is when you take those proposals to the people on the ground in provinces, in terms of how they're really going to engage with those issues. What's the general feel? Will those issues gain traction across the members of the ANC? That is the biggest challenge. There were no really radical economic proposal. If you listen to the president, if you had followed some of the sessions, they were more in line with what the Minister of Finance had tabled in his previous budgets. So it was more of saying that we cannot commit to the new expenditures. We have to, as they say, cut the size of the cloth according to the size. So it is going to be a challenging going forward if indeed those issues, which are more in line with the National Treasury's objective, will gain the support. I mean, you look at the Reserve Bank for example, it's an elephant in the room.
Yes.
The shareholders of the Reserve Bank, minority shareholders, they've been pushing hard so that they can exit from the Reserve Bank, but on condition that their shares are calculated on the balance sheet of the Reserve Bank. But the balance sheet of the Reserve Bank belongs to the people of the country, so it's not possible. So the bank's engagement was that no way, that is not going to happen, so the issue was put on hold. But then the ANC members started pushing for it, and the issue has been in discussion for the longest time. There is no proper solution.
Any possibility that this matter will be resolved in December? Remember, they still have about 3 or 4 months to look into these issues again. These are recommendations and proposals. The resolutions can only be in December. Do you think there will be any change, given what we have said, between now and December?
Clearly, if you look at the tone, there's no intention of ruffling the feathers. And the issue of the Reserve Bank, for example, it's been with us for the long time. So the next few months, it absolutely means nothing.
I hear you in terms of not ruffling feathers, but I think the ordinary members of the ANC may not have that kind of the viewpoint that these delegates had.
No, absolutely. I think we should expect more attention. We expect more people pushing certain radical ideas that they want them to be achieved. Some people are actually dismiss some of the resolutions, and that is going to be a contested area in terms of whose policies most delegates are going to support.
Let me bring you in, Sophie, here. The issue of electricity is actually a big deal. And I mean, as the international news editor, the issue of just transition, you've been reporting on this for quite some time. So what was your take from these delegates on the issue of just transition?
A pushback. I mean, the delegates were clear. When you adopt that just transition policy, it must be in a pace where South Africa is comfortable. And that pace speaks to you cannot afford to lose jobs when we are already bleeding. 2, you cannot close the mines, particularly in provinces such as Mpumalanga and Limpopo, where those provinces are depending on those mines in terms of economic activities. And that is why now the phrase within that paragraph that speaks to the just transition at the pace that is proper. In other words, you can see there was a pushback by these 2 provinces supported by other provinces. And when I spoke to the Minister of Finance a few hours ago, he pointed out that indeed they will ensure that they continue with that process of a just transition, including to ensure that it doesn't, like the President pointed out, compromise industrial development and issues related to the job creation. And therefore, the delegates, and as Tsepo pointed out, it was a very abstract approach in terms of issues. They were at the level where they were able to have grasps of what needs to be done, and where they wanted to do a pushback, they did exactly that.
So what does this say about the president himself, who has been part of international fora speaking about these issues and even the issue of funding to make sure that we go this route?
The Minister of Finance says to me this 8.4 billion US dollar that was made available by some of the G7 countries, they are still discussing in terms of the breakdown and whether what are you going to do with this money and where. For example, he says to me, for example, on the issue of the just transition, they want these developed countries to make money available for feasibility studies and technical studies to check whether when you close some of these coal mines, in terms of capacitating the workforce and also creating more job opportunities, what are you going to embark on? The process of training, skills development, technology, and all of that. And therefore, you can see that it will be a song that they will take to the G20 meeting. That's what he told me. And of course, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine has created an environment where there can be a pushback, because those industrialized countries, the 8, some of them are saying we need more coal now because we can't get gas and oil from Russia. And therefore, it is a very complicated matter now.
Tsepo, I see you want to say something there. Is there anything you want to say specifically?
Absolutely. I think on the issue of just transition, South Africa cannot be seen not to be doing something in terms of the climate change.
Yeah.
So there has to be a move. Yes, there is a pushback in terms of an abrupt movement away from fossil fuel. But remember, we have challenges of climate change. You've seen what happened in Durban, of course. And our power stations currently are nearing the end of their lives. So there has to be a viable plan in the next 20 years. I mean, from 2040, most of our power stations will be decommissioned, and the president mentioned they need to be repurposed. We're not sure exactly what that means, but they're not going to be available. So we need a very clear plan to deal with that as a now.
We come to this policy conference, Tsepo, when the president had just announced measures to deal with the issue of electricity. Do you think the delegates are convinced? Obviously, outside of the just transition that we have spoken about, are convinced of the plans in place that the president announced?
Well, it's a slew of plans, and I think many people are still trying to understand exactly what these plans mean. I mean, we're talking about several plans that the president has announced. I think the real test is where it will come when those contracts are out, who gets appointed, who are the role player. Remember, it's going to be a contested area in terms of companies that will be providing those services to the grid. There are people who are positioning themselves, so that will bring about a better understanding. The role of NERSA as well, in terms of how does it fit into that? Yeah. That is going to be an issue. Eskom as well, where does it come in? Tariff increases, where do they fit in the whole mix? And we've got very poor household. Can they afford that electricity? It may be available in abundance, but can they afford it?
I think, Muzwai, I just want to weigh in there. I spoke to the Minister of Finance, Tsepo. He says to me that on the 26th of October, he is going to make an announcement in terms of how Treasury is going to intervene in the Eskom debt. He told me that they are going to take a portion of that debt. They are still discussing the technicalities in terms of percentage-wise or money-wise, with the aim of, as delegates pointed out, assist Eskom in all costs. You can't allow Eskom to fail. Secondly, the delegates did support the president's plan, but they went further to say, in their view, the Department of Minerals and Energy must be responsible for Eskom. So you see, there's also a strong proposal in terms of how the president has to rejuggle his cabinet. It is still proposals. They must go to the conference in December where they must be adopted. But I agree with Tsepo that the delegates who attended this policy conference, I really want to say they were really up to the task. They were really up to the task.
Yes, if I may come in, we know the plan is to break down Eskom.
Yes.
And you cannot break down Eskom with a debt of 400 billion rand. So they have to come in, make sure that they deal with the plan so that they can break it down and start a new entity out of distribution, out of generation, and transmission.
Yes. Well, at the core of everything is the party. So we can talk about all these grand plans. We'll do this, we'll do that. Is the party that has met here, are they at the position where they'll be able to do this? Their own president, Sophie, made it clear that we are at the weakest as a governing party. Given that they start from this base of being at the weakest, will they be able to do anything?
Well, if there's a political will, they can turn the situation around. The problem is, as a leader, you must inspire hope. 2, you must lead by example. Now that you have the president of the party having these challenges that he is currently experiencing, the parliament, it is going to be difficult to drive the whole support base and the membership to really focus on the task at hand. But they can do it. But you require a political will. But also, they must accept that they veered off the road on many issues. And the South African population, the voter in particular, is disgruntled. If they don't do anything between now and 2024, unfortunately, the voters are going to speak as they did last year, and therefore they will have to shape up. It's up to them, but with all the divisions that we see currently and contestation, I mean the issue of step aside, going back to the branches, because there's a view that that step aside is being used to patch or is used selectively. And you would recall that when the former deputy president of the ANC was speaking to the media there, he said, yes, step aside, but you have the DC policy, and you must ensure that the DC committee is people with credibility who can implement without fear or favor. Secondly, don't be selective.
Tsepo, we've heard them speak about the challenges at local government, and most of the municipalities are run by these people who are here, but they are complaining like us. Given that we are in this, is it 18 months away from the elections or 19?
Almost 2 years.
Will they be able to turn the situation around, particularly at local government? Because where they've been punished the most, the governing party, is at local government. So, and people will judge them by that. So, some of what they said on local government, does it inspire confidence?
Well, the president speak about the overhaul of the local government. I'm not sure exactly what that means. He says the government must appoint people who've got skills, are competent, and can deliver.
Can I stop you there? Were you hearing that for the first time?
Well, the issue has been mentioned many times, and the challenges of local government, we all know about it. There are blurred, structures in terms of reporting between provinces who want to intervene in local government, and that becomes a problem for many municipalities. The issue of contracts, it's a contested area, so there's and people who are there. How do you get rid of those people? If you say you're going to overhaul, because it's not just your executives, it's also support staff who are there, guys in the Department of Finance who's supposed to put together a report for the Auditor General. They don't know what they're doing. How do you get rid of those people? How do you overhaul? So it's going to be a big challenge.
Sophie, many people have said generally the ANC has very good policies on paper, but it's the lack of implementation. Is there anything that suggests to you that this conference may be the start of that implementation will?
I don't know, Mzwai. It's quite difficult. You'd recall that starting from the Mafikeng conference, the former president of the ANC, Nelson Mandela then, did point out in terms of the weaknesses of the organization and its cadres. There was a warning. They went to the NGC in Port Elizabeth. I remember very well, the political report of the then president of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, was quite harsh. And also, when you look at the strategy and tactic, they strengthened that. But secondly, the eye of the needle, the document called Eye of the Needle. Yeah. They agreed that in terms of deployment, they must ensure that people who are deployed in different structures, both in the organization and in government, they must pass the eye of the needle document to ensure that they have all those qualities. But they didn't
Has
implement.
It been happening?
Polokwane, the then Secretary General of the ANC, Kgalema Motlanthe, who later became the Deputy President, was quite scathing in his report. When they came here in 2017, Gwede Mantashe's report, the Secretary General's report, pointed out at weaknesses. But look, they are in a worse situation. So it is well and good to point out at these weaknesses, but is there a political will to implement? Not only within the ANC, in government as well. The South African government, we have the best policies. If those policies can be implemented, we can see a change in terms of the lives of ordinary people. Political will to implement.
What do you think is the hold-up, Tsepo? Why are we having good policies, but somehow we're not implementing them as a country now? And then, of course, you'll throw it back to the ANC as the governing party.
Mam Sophie mentioned political will. But the other important issue is consensus in South Africa, not only within the ANC, but outside as well. In order to do anything, you need consensus. And sometimes it hamstrung the plans that are there because it's not easy to find a consensus. We may come up with grand plans that are promising, but there are people who are out there looking at them and they're already preparing their legal team to challenge those plans. So a plan that could be implemented in the next 6 months could actually take 5 years because there's no consensus. So that is going to be the biggest challenge going forward. And it is a South African problem.
I think, I just want to agree with Tsepo on issue of consultation and South Africans. All of us agreeing when we have challenges to say this is the line of march. It is a huge problem. You'd recall that the recent former President Mbeki making headlines in terms of critiquing the president, the sitting president, to say during the State of the Nation, we spoke about the compact and it's not happening. That compact, the problem is to get everybody a buy-in, particularly business. There's some reluctance. But the very same Mbeki, when he was addressing the ANC structures in Free State, he started there to talk about his concerns that they are not finalizing this document. He pointed out that the problem in South Africa is that they have been struggling to get business to really buy into government policies. And I think I agree with Tsepo that the other issue is, it's not only the ANC that is a broad church where you have vested interests. You also have the same when you look at the country with people with different interests.
The other elephant in the room is the issue of immigration that somehow touches on foreigners or foreign nationals, whichever way you put it. Right now, as a country, we are faced with a situation where criminality has been committed. Of course, we are not conclusive as yet in terms of who, but there is an indication pointing to the foreign element. And you were looking earlier at a document which speaks about national interest as well. So how do you think the ANC navigates taking into account the issue of national interest, but also balancing it with the fact that we are part of a bigger global village?
Well, I think I spoke to the Minister of Home Affairs earlier on. One big issue that, or a resolution or a proposal that is going to the conference in December is that South Africa must withdraw from these UN treaties. The UN treaties that addresses the issues that are related to migration, immigration, and all of that. Because some of the treaties are the ones that are putting us in this situation we find ourselves in. He is saying to me, Sophie, look, when some of these treaties were presented and approved by the world body, the UN, those countries who were part of the UN then, when we were under apartheid, they were able to raise their concern that this treaty, yes, we can support it on condition there's a clause that says, for example, issues related to jobs, how do you protect it? And therefore, that resolution or that proposal on pulling out of treaties, but go back when you have protected your interests. I think for me, one issue where the ANC is admitting that this issue is a problem and it needs an attention.
From the skills point of view, Tsepo, how do you think this will impact on South Africa's productivity relating to skills that we import from outside?
Now, on the issue of skill, the law is very clear that scarce skills is allowed in, but that's not where the problem is. The problem is on people who come in, have no level of skills. Many of them come in as illegal immigrants. Some of them disguised as asylum seekers. The law, as Mam Sophie indicated, cannot deal with people who are here for economic reason, but disguised as asylum seekers. So it's vague. And as she correctly pointed out, the minister indicated that, look, they need to withdraw from those treaties because it's been a long time since we've been dealing with the issue. But the other issue is many of these illegal immigrants bring in very cheap labor that is benefiting business. So I don't think business is going to take that line down. They're going to challenge it because they are able to get skills, not skills, but get work, cheap labor
yes,
from the rest of the African neighboring countries, and they don't have to comply with many labor laws in the country.
So how do we as a country then accept that companies will just break the rules simply because they want to benefit?
Well, we have a challenge of enforcement in South Africa. At times, we don't really have to come up with the laws. We need to strengthen and make sure that we enforce the current laws. We know that within Home Affairs, there's been incidents of corruption where people are bribed. But there are people who have businesses and they're willing to take that risk. I know of a factory where they will go raid the factory, take those people to the Lindela, but 2 weeks later, that plant is running with full illegal immigrants. Some of them were taken to Lindela, but they're back doing the work. And then after 3 months, the police and the immigration officer will be back at the same plant. And you find that there's not even one South African in that particular factory.
You know what, Mzoi, I want to talk about, you spoke about the recent incident in Krugersdorp.
Yeah.
I spoke to the minister. You know, contrary to the reports out there that it is one nationality.
Yeah.
I was shocked to realize that actually it's foreign nationals from different countries. And the very same country that we are critical of, it's not majority. In other words, the people who are facing these charges now are not, the majority are not from the country that has been criticized right now for this case. And it speaks to, in the SADC region, it is the responsibility of member countries of the SADC region to make the climate conducive, both social, political, and security-wise, to ensure so that their own citizens must feel at home. They shouldn't see a necessity to come to South Africa either for economic challenges, security challenges, or political challenges. Yes, movement of people and goods and services, you can't stop it. We are in a global village. It does happen in Europe and everywhere. But my problems why the African leaders, they've made the continent not really conducive for its citizens to be, you know, satisfied and stay within their. Look at what's happening in the Mediterranean seas. Look at what's happening in Spain with Africans from the north. I mean, that's a genocide. So our leaders must also shape up, Mzwai. I mean, South Africa, yes, we have facilities, we have opportunities. What are the leaders of these neighboring countries doing? As a leader, are you proud that people from your country are linked to this horrible crime? What are you saying? No word from SADC, no word from any leader in the SADC region to say, South Africa, we are sorry or what. Everybody is quiet. Wow. I mean, they must take responsibility.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, you deal with a lot of African and international stuff, so clearly that passion is understandable. And of course, we've been speaking to our economics editor, Tsepo Mongwai, and our foreign editor, actually international news editor, Sophie Mkwena, basically dissecting the policy conference. In the weeks and months ahead, we will be looking into what exactly transpired here. But of course, if time allowed, so we're going to be talking about the issue of contestation that will start taking center stage. Remember, in 3 months' time, we will come back here to elect the new leadership. Let's go back to the studio.
Thank you very much. Well, a very comprehensive wrap there by my SABC News colleagues at NASREC following the ANC's 6th Policy Conference. ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa gave his closing address earlier, placing strong emphasis on a number of issues, including, of course, the party's renewal plan, social compact to eradicating poverty, unemployment and inequality. Of course, the question is, will the party use their policies to drive the much needed change at societal level, as my colleagues indicated there, given its very own internal challenges?